Hello again and welcome to another Saturday Nightline video. While enjoying the gameplay, we also listen to different crime stories. And the story we brought you today is the story of a very scary Korean serial killer. Do not miss this video because every part of the story will surprise you in some way. Lee Chun-jae is a South Korean serial killer known for committing the Hwasong serial murders. Between 1986 and 1994, Lee murdered 15 women and young girls in addition to numerous sexual assaults predominantly in Hwasong, Gyeonggi and surrounding areas. The serial murders, which remained unsolved for 30 years, are considered to be the most infamous in South Korea's modern history. They are often compared to those committed by the Zodiac Killer in the United States and served as the inspiration for the 2003 film Memories of Murder. Lee was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 20 years for killing his sister-in-law in 1994. But despite DNA evidence and his confession to the other murders in 2019, he could not be prosecuted for them because the statute of limitations had expired. Born on January 31, 1963, Lee Chun-jae was said to be an individual who grew up well in his early years, and had a good education up till high school and worked well with others, according to his mother in 2019 when the 75-year-old was interviewed about her son's crimes. Lee's mother was reportedly devastated and shocked to hear that her son was involved in the unsolved Hwasong murders. He had a younger brother who drowned in his childhood, an incident which purportedly traumatized him. After graduating from high school in February 1983, Lee joined the Republic of Korea Army and served as a tank driver. He was discharged on January 23, 1986. He then worked for an electric parts company. In 1990, he began his job at a parent construction company in Chongpa, Yongsan, where he became a crane driver without a license. The following year, he was a crane driver for an aggregate company in Chongwon, Chungcheongbuk. In April 1992, Lee married a bookkeeper and quit his job in March 1993. According to Lee's wife, Lee was an alcoholic and violent husband and father who often physically abused her and their son. On September 26, 1989, around 0:55, Lee broke into a house in Gwangju, Suwon, Gyeonggi Province, with weapons and gloves, and was discovered by the landlord. He was sentenced by the Suwon District Court to 1 year and 6 months in prison in the first trial in February 1990 for the charges of robbery and violence. After the first trial, Lee filed an appeal, claiming that he was beaten by an unknown young man and entered the victim's house while being chased. In the second trial, following Lee's appeal, the court suspended his sentence to 2 years of probation, where he was released in mid-April 1990. The victims, all women, were found bound, gagged, raped, and in most cases strangled to death with their own clothes, such as pantyhose or socks. The murders sparked the largest criminal case in South Korea with over 2 million man-days spent on investigation and over 21,000 suspects investigated. The cases remained unsolved for 30 years, until Lee himself was identified as a suspect in 2019 and Lee confessed to 4 undisclosed murders not attributed to the serial murders and all 10 serial murders, including the case previously determined to be a copycat crime for which a man named Yoon Sung-yo was sentenced to life in prison. The case began with the disappearance of Lee Wan-im on September 15, 1986, while returning home after visiting her daughter. Her body was found in a pasture on September 19, 1986, at 1400 hours, 4 days following the murder. A month later, on October 20, 1986, Park Yoon-suk disappeared after getting off the bus while returning home from Songpyeon. Her body was found on October 23, 1986, at 1450 in a canal. 2 months later, on December 12, 1986, Kwon Young-ban disappeared in front of her house. Her body was found 3 months later on April 23, 1987, at 1400 hours in an embankment. 7 more murders followed over the next years. The last murder was estimated to have taken place around 2100 hours on April 3, 1991. Kwon Soon-sang was discovered dead, raped, and strangled with pantyhose on a hill. The case is infamous within Korea for being the first truly identifiable string of murders with a similar modus operandi. Reportedly, more than 2 million police officers, a record number for a single case, were mobilized to investigate the murders. Moreover, police officers involved spent 2 million man-days on the case. The total number of suspects also grew to enormous numbers, eventually reaching a total count of 21,280 individuals. In addition, 40,116 individuals had their fingerprints taken, and 570 DNA samples and 180 hair samples were analyzed. The first 5 murders happened within a 6 km radius of Hwasong, prompting police to spread out in teams of 2, positioned every 100 meters, but the next killing happened where there was no police presence. During the investigation, rumors that the killer targeted women wearing red clothes on rainy days spread, leading some female police officers to wear red clothes in an attempt to lure the killer into a trap. A suspect sketch was drawn based on the memory of the bus driver, Kang, and bus conductor, who saw a man get on the bus shortly after the 7th murder on September 7, 1988. The characteristics of the suspect, which were described by the bus driver, were similar to the descriptions given by survivors who were sexually assaulted. According to the victims, the culprit at the time of the incident was a thin-framed man in his mid-20s, with a height of 165 to 170 centimeters, short-cut sporty-type hair, no double eyelids, and a sharp nose. In addition, he was described as having soft hands. Police also stated that the suspect had a B blood type, but in 2019, police acknowledged that this was likely inaccurate, because Lee has blood type O. A survivor of the serial murders, 36-year-old Lee Ji-ran, was attacked by Lee sometime in late 1986, and she described him as skinny, with a low voice. On July 27, 1989, Yoon Sung-yo, a 22-year-old man, was arrested for the murder of the 8th victim, 14-year-old Park Sang-hee. Yoon admitted guilt during questioning, and according to a 1989 report written by an expert at National Forensic Service, the forensic tests of pubic hair samples found at the scene suggested similarities with his, returning a 40% match with Yoon's. This case was determined to be a copycat crime, and Yoon was sentenced to life in prison. In addition, in the 10th case, The genes obtained from a semen sample were different from the ninth case, and the location and method of crime were different from the other cases, suggesting a different culprit. Except for the first crime, which occurred around 6 o'clock, the second to 10th murders occurred mainly between 1900 hours and 2300 hours. Reports state that at least 4 individuals, deemed as possible suspects, took their own lives in the 1990s after being investigated and allegedly abused by police. On September 18, 2019, police announced that Lee had been identified as a suspect in the serial murders. He was identified after DNA from the underwear of one of the victims was matched with his, and subsequent DNA testing linked him to 4 of the other unsolved serial murders. At the time he was identified, he was already serving a life sentence at a prison in Busan for the rape and murder of his sister-in-law. Lee initially denied any involvement in the serial murders, but on October 2, 2019, police announced that Lee had confessed to killing 14 people, including all 10 victims in the serial murders, which includes a case previously considered to be a copycat crime, and 4 others. 3 of those other murders happened in Hwasong but had not previously been attributed to the serial killer, and the other 2 happened in Cheongju. As of October 2019, details about those 4 victims have not been released. In addition to the murders, he also confessed to more than 30 rapes and attempted rapes. On November 15, 2019, police announced that they had reached a provisional conclusion that Lee was responsible for all 10 serial murders. Police expressed that Lee had a weak self-esteem due to his introverted personality but experienced a sense of accomplishment and self-reliance for the first time in his mandatory military service, which led him to commit sex crimes to express his frustration caused by his monotonous life following his discharge from the military. The provincial police chief stated that Lee displayed psychopathic tendencies by being unable to empathize with the victim's pain and suffering and continuously showing off his crimes. On July 2, 2020, the police confirmed that Lee committed 14 murders and 9 rapes in relation to the Hwasong serial murders with the motive of relieving his sexual desire, closing the case 33 years after the first victim's death. On November 2, 2020, Lee appeared in court as a witness for the 8th murder retrial, where he publicly confessed to committing 14 murders in relation to the Hwasong serial murders and 30 sex crimes, which led to Yoon being acquitted. Lee remained in prison serving his life sentence. Lee also expressed that he had no intention to be granted parole and released, as he did not want to face the public condemnation for his crime like notorious child rapist Cho Do-soon, whose release after serving his 12-year jail term led to public outrage and widespread protests.